Hi there, my name's Charlotte Connolly and I'm the museum curator at the Polar Museum, and I'm delighted to be welcoming you to this panel discussion as part of the Big Freeze Art Festival. And I'm joined by three guests today. The first is Zsuzsanna Ardó, who is an award-winning visual artist, curator and writer by profession, and who came up with the idea for the Polar Self-Portraits project that we'll be talking about today. John Bostock is a composer who composes concert music and performs as a jazz musician. He was born in Sydney, Australia, and has been living in Israel since 1987. And Clarice Zdanski is an artist, an art historian, an art educator, a writer, and a translator on art. And Clarice contributed to the first issue of the Polar Self-Portraits project. So to kick off, Zsuzsanna, this is your project. Can you tell me how it came about?
Hi. Well, it all depends how far we go back, but I suppose, strictly speaking, it started about maybe 10 years ago in the woods here in London. You don't necessarily think of woods when you talk about London, but you know, on the highest point of London sits the woods called Hampstead Heath. And that's where it started. I remember the moment actually. And from there, that curiosity, you know, what is under the soil there? And the research, it just obsessively took me further and further into this project until 2014, I finally satisfied my curiosity and managed to go to the Arctic. And that was a really life-changing experience. And then I started producing these works, you know, The Bears in My Eyes and many others, the Polar Self-Portraits. I was very interested in how perception changes. So my perception of the woods was completely different before I knew, you know, when I realized that I'm actually virtually walking on glaciers or the deposits, because very nearby here, the tube station just next to us, when they dug it out, they found actually glacier deposits. So this connection was tremendous. And while I was making my polar self-portraits, I felt such a sense of urgency and relevance that I actually reached out to artists, and Clarice included, whose work I admired, and I felt that they had passion for the same thing. And then it kind of, you know, it launched in various places. It had its history. It was at the Florence Biennale and many, many places, including the Arctic and the Antarctic. And then just this year, I was talking to John, and we were exploring ideas of collaboration and what to collaborate on. And it was his choice, this film. And he must, I mean, he will talk about it, but he must be impacted by this film. And so we decided to do that. And that's how this project came about, the second edition of the film.
Fantastic. So I'm just going to briefly describe what the film entails, and people who are watching the festival will be able to watch that as well as part of the festival. But it's an interweaving of film footage from the Arctic, so you kind of bob along on the sea, and then images pop up, and these images are self-portraits that people have made, imagining that they were in the Arctic and then making a portrait of themselves. And so it's that John saw, and then for the second edition, he's produced and created a piece of music that accompanies that work. So I wondered, Clarice, whether I could turn to you next. You were one of the artists that contributed to the project. How did you first hear about it, and why did you decide to get involved?
Well, I heard about it, of course, directly from Zsuzsanna, and so it sounded very interesting. And I didn't really know what I would do. I had no idea what kind of work I would produce. But the idea of this landscape emerging within you and around you, and you know, sort of putting yourself into it, appealed to me. And I mean, I started doing all kinds of things. I took pictures of myself and froze them in the freezer under water and things, but that didn't really work very well as an image. And so I started making lots and lots and lots of drawings, okay? And the drawings were very gestural. I mean, some of them were like soaked water that then I would claw as if I were a bear, and they were making these marks. And I don't know, I was trying to capture, I did these swirls that would kind of look like a dancing bear or evoke the sense of a dancing bear. And then the ones that really captured me most, I found this picture of a little bear, a polar bear, and it was very forlorn and sad. And so I sort of merged this on my face and became the bear and did a bunch of bear series. And I eventually, the portrait that made it into the exhibit was one of my, I imagined myself as a bear swimming around in the sea. I love to swim. And this became the one that went into the exhibit. Myself, Clarice, the polar bear, swimming around with these other bears. So yes, that's about how it worked out.
And I should just add that, of course, nobody else knew what my polar portrait was. I mean, it's not, I was very interested in seeing what other people might come up with. And it was very interesting to see when a couple of people came up with the polar bear idea, or in some way or another.
And so I'm interested in how doing this project, which, I mean, Zsuzsanna, you'd been to the Arctic, but Clarice, I don't know whether you had. Did it change the way you thought about the Arctic, having to spend so much time putting yourself in that place?
I've never been to the Arctic. I have been as far north as the Northwest Territory in Canada, but that was in the summer. And in the past, I have done quite a lot of mountaineering and alpinism. So I've been up to almost 7,000 meters, but it's not, of course, the Arctic. So did it change the way I think about it? Yes, because my idea was always the Arctic, the Antarctic, things that scientists do that's kind of unapproachable. The conditions have to be very, rigid and all this, but of course people live there. And so I think that this kind of forced me to think about this as a place that that people really live in, and that not only people but also animals, and it's very important. And somehow that what's happening in the Arctic with everything melting down is going to affect us, just in maybe even the whole pandemic that we're in right now. It makes us see the things that can happen. Also, 2020 was not just a year of the pandemic, it was also a year of terrible meteorological biospheric disasters, fires, torrential rains, all sorts of things. So I think that, yes, it did make me think about this.
Mm-hmm. And Zsuzsanna, you were saying that you were interested to see how many people kind of referred to the polar bear, which is something you'd drawn on. Were there any other surprises on the way as you were in dialogue with other artists and collaborators?
I suppose not in the artistic responses as such, although it was very satisfying to see the very wide range of responses, very different. I was surprised during this project that how deep the experience can be. So how one experience can be so profoundly deep, even though it's not traumatic, because of course traumatic experiences leave very deep marks. How silence can be so such a psychological power. So I was surprised, and I was surprised to see the interconnectivity, the interconnections, how people connected with this. And also in terms of how space is all relative, that where is the polar region? I mean, you can't just hop over there really, even today. Mm-hmm. And then if you start thinking about it, you find it under your skin. That was another surprise, I suppose. And maybe, I mean, there were so many gestures along the way, the generosity and creativity of the artists. So, and even institutions. So when I called, say, the British Antarctic Survey in Cambridge, and I just gave them a call, and actually there was a human being at the end of the line, and they called me back, and they took the memory stick of the exhibition with their special postal delivery or whatever, to the Antarctic, because for me it was very important that, because it is a global project and it's about the planet and it's about interconnectivity, interconnections at every level, it was for me very important that this project should be seen both in the Arctic and the Antarctic. And so in the Arctic, there was an art museum in Ilulissat in Greenland, where they were very happy to have it. And so the Inuit artists there could see it, and others. And in the Antarctic, the research teams could see it. I mean, it's all very symbolic, isn't it? But sometimes symbolic gestures are very important.
Mm-hmm. So, John, you became involved a bit later and have composed this piece of music. How did that come about? And how did, I mean, Zsuzsanna's just been talking about the very global nature of all the contributions. You're a really long way from the Arctic, now in Israel. So how did you approach it, and how did your geographical location play into that?
In my own mind, I've been involved with ecological issues since about 1975, when Paul Ehrlich published an article. He's a well-known American professor. And over the years, I became aware of things happening, say, in the Barrier Reef in Australia, and how all that almost passed away, you know, while we were watching. And now it seems that what is happening in the Arctic, the ice melting, is an issue that's happening. It's something that's happening so quickly that if we don't do something about it, it's going to be gone quicker than people will decide to do anything. So for me, it is an issue. And so when I saw the film at first, I was very taken by the original soundtrack, which was just recorded as they were filming, and the sounds of the ice breaking up, just by putting a microphone in the water and hearing. And the effect of the culmination of the film, the way the film works, the original film, is towards this increasing sound of ice breaking. And this was, for me, a challenge and an inspiration to try and, I wanted to, in some way, incorporate music that would at the same be sort of subliminal at the beginning, that it would slowly interact with the sounds that are coming from the environment, and then become involved with well, there are all kinds of things happening in the film. There is a particular rhythm to the editing, and there are points where you become aware of the boat sailing and different speeds of the boat, and or for instance, there's a place just where a bird flies up in the background, and all this is happening at the same time that these portraits are being superimposed on this background material. So there's foreground, there's background, and a lot of these visual elements have a direct correspondence with music. So in a way, I just had to be very careful because there are so many portraits. I think I made a count here, 32, if I'm not wrong, or maybe more, 36. I have a list here. I just had to write it all down to keep control of what I was doing. And slowly I started inserting musical elements that were related to the environment, or what I heard that was going on even before there was music. And it starts to build up. And at one point, it has to actually accumulate into a theme. And it's very interesting that you both talked about the polar bear, because the first time that the polar bear appears, that's the point where I decided that's what I could relate to the most. The polar bear's sort of on an iceberg floating away. And that's where I wrote, and I actually have it in my own handwriting here, a polar bear theme. I called it that. For some reason, that's what we all three of us have related to. And this theme then comes back in various guises in different orchestrations. And as the crescendo of the material builds up to the point of the credits, it returns once again at the very, very end of the film. And the other element that I used was using the sound of the ice breaking, was something that I could do with the computer, in which the computer analyzes this recording and then just gives me the what you call in music attack points. In other words, just where the sound begins and the length of it. And this got interpreted by two musical instruments, a contrabass, a double bass, and an electric piano. And they're basically they're random. So there's this interaction of written music and random elements that are coming from the sound of the ice breaking. And that reminds me at the end of some sort of a jazz improvisation, if you would like to call it that.
So lots of different things going into that. And is there at any point an element of your own self-portrait in there? I suppose almost any composition, there's a piece of yourself in there. But
well, certainly, obviously, I think at the time, well, as you said, here in Israel, I was writing it over the summer, so it was very hot. Maybe I helped to cool down by watching the film, but I found that obviously after the fact. In other words, I was involved with the process, I was involved with the materials, and then after the fact, then I listened to it and I thought, oh, yes, well, there are many things that are in common with other things that I have done, especially perhaps an album of solo piano variations that I did in 2008, which has got that kind of range. It's got something of that kind of romantic ballad, song-like quality, and also has things that are very sort of avant-garde and random as well. So the whole gamut.
And so, Clarice and Zsuzsanna, I'm curious as to how John's later addition to your work, has it changed the way you think about your work or changed your relationship with it in any way? This kind of new injection of dialogue?
What do you think, Clarice?
Okay, well, I was just making some notes about the piece, because I noted that, like, at certain points it evoked certain kinds of images. That at 1 minute and 20 seconds, for example, I got this idea again of the scientists. I think there were a lot of sort of like equipment noises or something, equipment sounds that were coming out. And then also this idea of putting the microphone under the water, these waves that made you feel like you were really in the water, could feel cold. I mean, and in this point of view that you were right, there, I thought I really felt like I was in the water, especially around 10.5 minutes. And then my self-portrait comes in around 13 minutes or something like that. And then there's that other one of that woman's body that's kind of like a big iceberg with a bear on top of it. And then finally, again, around the end, almost near the 21st minute, you get these almost like sonar noises that I thought were, again, this idea of these masses of ice and danger, and again, cold, and how really small you are in front of the elements. But I think that, yes, I was very interested in the piece. So.
Mm-hmm. And how about you, Zsuzsanna?
Well, I have a lot of baggage, because I thought a lot about it. And I remember that originally, I was thinking about using, when we did the first edition of the film, I was considering maybe using one of the many interpretations of winter in classical music, for example, and I watched it with Vivaldi and many others. But then in the end, with a wonderful editor with whom I was co-editing the film, who was in Washington at the time, so we were doing it already a long distance. We were discussing it and decided that no, it's just the silence, and we don't need anything else. And so when John came up with this, and I should say that creativity can be so unpredictable, unless it is a commission and you know what you need to do and you have the rules. But I mean, when I wrote, I had a specific poem in mind that has been set to music already by a Syrian Bosnian female composer, and I thought it would be really great to match it up with an Israeli composer, the same poem in dialogue. And John's interest was primarily in this film, and so we went with the film. And then when I saw the outcome of the film, I mean, it's a lesson in itself, what music can do if it is responding directly to what's there. And it's the narrative development of the music is so finely tuned into the visual narrative of the film, very sensitively, that I thought it worked really well. And I would recommend to anybody who has any interest in either music or art or film or the polar region or climate change to watch the two together, back to back, and see how it impacts on everybody, without the music and with the music, and what is it that silent does better maybe, and what music does better. It's a whole educational project in itself.
And it really feels to me like an ongoing conversation. And of course, it is an ongoing conversation because as part of the festival, we're inviting anyone who wants to make their own self-portrait, their own polar self-portrait. Imagine yourself in the polar regions, and by whatever means you think is most appropriate, make a self-portrait. And we're really interested to see what you come up with. I wondered if any of you have any tips. I really enjoyed, Clarice, what you were saying about trying to put your pictures in the freezer or making marks as if you were a bear. So really just trying anything is, so anything goes is really exciting. But I just wondered if any of you had any thoughts or suggestions or provocations for people at home who might be considering having a go at their own self-portrait.
I would definitely say give them some ideas, because if you're talking about anybody, some people might not even try because, oh, what would I try? But there's just about anything you could do. Ice melting. If you have nothing at all, we had to do this last year when we had to go into lockdown and my students had nothing to work with. So I was with the watercolor class. I said, well, take water and paint on the sidewalk and take a picture of it. And then when it dries up, it will go away. You know, all of the things that you can do. If people live in places where they have lots of snow, use the snow or something. So again, because anything can work. And of course, since anybody can do things, there might be all kinds of interesting things that you might not have anticipated.
I would say two very practical things, really. You know, first of all, anything is possible, and if you watch the film, you see how it is true that anything is possible to approach it in various, and experiment, and feel free to have all kinds of styles in front of you. You don't have to commit immediately or even later. And then I find that perception is tremendously important, and dreams have such an important part in this. So I find it helpful to think about things before I fall asleep. And then often I wake up around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And I'm not even sure what it is, but then suddenly I can feel it coming. So dreams are good. And then just a very practical thing is once you have a few pictures, a good way to have a critical analytical view of your work is to put it up in places around you where you don't expect to see it. So in the bathroom, in the kitchen, in the hallway, upside down, whatever, where you don't expect to see it. And don't even look at it. Just as you walk by, let it go, let it enter your peripheral vision. And it's amazing how you notice things that way. So you can make a decision then.
And how about you, John? How do you approach setting out with a new work ahead of you?
Okay, this is difficult. I actually do have an involvement in the visual arts as a student. As a late life student, I actually do paint as well. And so maybe there is a connection. Usually my teachers, if they criticize my work, they say it's very musical. So I don't know what that means. But if we're talking about people making self-portraits,
I mean, it could be a sound work as well. We haven't said it has to be visual. It could be anything. Well,
could be. And I think in any work, I think you just have to open yourself up and listen or look. As artists have to, the equivalent of in music to looking is listening. And in this particular work, that's how I started, was just by listening.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think I'm going to leave it there unless any of you have got anything else you'd like to add. No, well, brilliant. Thank you ever so much for your time. It's been really interesting to hear about how the work came about and how it's grown and sort of taken on a life of its own. And that life is continuing now with our very public call for anyone to join in. So we're really excited to see what everyone comes up with. And thank you to all of you for your time today. I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon.